I pushed my cleaning cart down the gleaming hallway of Apex Dynamics, where million-dollar chandeliers lit up expensive suits. Yet no one saw me until the day I shook their entire world. I'm Maya Jackson, 42 years old, an African-American woman with calloused hands from scrubbing granite floors for 10 years at a 60-story tower in downtown Atlanta. Every morning, I enter Apex Dynamics, a leading tech company specializing in artificial intelligence, in my silver-gray uniform, my bucket clanking beside me. The white executives glide past me like I'm nothing more than a smudge on the glass. Their leather shoes click million-dollar calls echo from their phones, but I don't exist to them. I'm a shadow, invisible, the nameless cleaning lady. But inside my chest, a quiet fire has been burning, waiting for the day it erupts. This morning in Atlanta was bitterly cold, my breath turning to mist as I pushed my cart through the main lobby. Light from the massive crystal chandelier reflected off the floor I had just polished to a mirror shine. I looked up and caught my reflection. A black woman, hair pulled back tight, eyes weary but sharp. That wasn't just me. It was a story no one knew. Outside this job, I lived in a small apartment in southeast Atlanta, where police sirens cried every night. I cared for my grandmother, who raised me on stories of the civil rights struggles of the 60s, and my daughter, Amara, 15, who dreams of becoming a cardiologist. Every dollar I earned cleaning floors went into her books and tutoring classes. But at Apex, I wasn't a mother, a granddaughter, or a dreamer. I was just the woman with the mop. That day, everything changed. When the elevator doors opened, I was mopping the lobby, the smell of bleach stinging my nose. Brandon Pierce, CEO of Apex, stepped out in a fitted navy suit. Blonde hair slicked back, his trademark smug smile in place. He was the symbol of white power, featured on Forbes with the headline, "Self-Made Billionaire Under 40." Flanking him was a group of white executives laughing loudly, like they owned the world. I lowered my head and kept mopping. Suddenly, a loud crash broke the air. Someone from the group had knocked over a Starbucks cup, brown liquid, spreading across the floor, right in front of the elevator. I glanced up and caught Brandon's eyes. He didn't say a word, just pointed at the spill and barked, voice like ice. "Clean it up, lady." The lobby fell silent. Everyone from the receptionist to the accountants turned to look. Laughter erupted from the group of directors, as if I were a joke. I stood there, gripping my mop handle, feeling the blood boil in my veins. My face burned, not from shame, but from years of suppressed rage. I wanted to scream in Brandon's face, to toss the bucket at his $1,000 suit. But I bit my lip, knelt, and scrubbed the coffee off the floor. Their laughter echoed in my head as I pushed my cart into the break room afterward. But in that lonely moment under the dim fluorescent light, I vowed that Brandon Pierce would pay. Not today, not with fists, but with something more substantial: the truth. Apex Dynamics is more than a company. It's a giant machine where AI algorithms shape the future, from self-driving cars to online ads. But behind the glitter lies a rigged system. I've seen workers like me, people of color, blue-collar folks, treated like trash. I've heard the stories. Marcus, the security guard, was fired for requesting time off to care for his sick wife. Tanya, the receptionist, let go for being unprofessional when she refused to smile at a director. And I know Brandon isn't just a bad boss. He's an abuser of power. A white man standing atop a pyramid mocking people like me. But I had a secret, something no one at Apex could have imagined. 10 years ago, my uncle, a silent investor who had worked with major Wall Street firms, passed away and left me an inheritance, a significant stake in Apex Dynamics. I could have sold it, bought a big house, sent Amara to an elite school. But I chose to stay scrubbing floors, watching, waiting. Because I knew one day I'd use that power to take down Brandon and the entire corrupt system he stood for. That day when his laughter rang through the lobby, I made my decision. The time had come. I wasn't just fighting for me. I was fighting for my grandmother, who once walked past segregation barricades to vote. For Amara, so she would never have to bow her head to anyone. For Marcus, Tanya, and every invisible worker. As I left the break room and pushed my cart down the hallway, the chandelier still gleamed overhead. But inside me, a plan had begun to form. Brandon Pierce didn't know it, but he had just lit the match to a storm. Have you ever felt the fire of justice burn in your chest, even when the whole world tells you to stay silent? Opening sentence. As the lights of Atlanta shimmered beyond the glass windows of Apex Dynamics, I pushed my cleaning cart through the empty offices. Yet inside me, memories of injustice and a burning dream were quietly shaping a revolution. Every night, as the 60-story tower of Apex Dynamics sank into darkness, I worked alone, the wheels of my cart creaking down the long hallways. The luxurious offices with walnut desks and black computer screens felt like a world apart from my small apartment in southeast Atlanta. There I am, Maya Jackson, not just a janitor, but a mother, a granddaughter, an African-American woman, carrying stories no one at Apex ever cared to hear. I live with my grandmother Ella, who once marched alongside Martin Luther King Jr. in the civil rights movement, and my daughter Amara, a bright-eyed 15-year-old who dreams of becoming a cardiologist. I spend most of my wages on science books for Amara and her monthly tutoring fees. But at Apex, I'm just the woman with the mop, the one white executives breeze past without a glance. That night, after the humiliation with the coffee cup in the lobby, I pushed my cart up to the 45th floor, where Brandon Pierce's office sat at the corner of the tower, overlooking the entire city of Atlanta. The transparent glass walls reflected the city lights like the world belonged to him. Brandon Pierce, 38. The CEO was the poster child of American tech stardom. He appeared on magazine covers with a smug smile boasting about how Apex Dynamics was shaping the future through artificial intelligence. But I saw a different Brandon. I saw the man who threw lavish yacht parties in Savannah while firing employees without hesitation. I heard the whispers in the break room, Marcus, the black security guard, fired for requesting a single day off to care for his cancer-stricken wife. Tanya, the receptionist, terminated for refusing to be overly friendly with a white executive. Apex wasn't just a tech company. It was a system where workers like me, especially people of color, were treated like disposable tools. I stopped outside Brandon's office. Papers were scattered across his desk, and cold coffee cups were piled in the trash. He left traces, as if the entire tower were his playground. Then a sound startled me. Light spilled through the crack of a small meeting room beside his office. I crept closer, silent as a shadow, and heard Brandon's voice, low but sharp. "Delete it. No one can see that report." I ducked behind the wall, heart pounding, and saw him through the door crack, standing beside a shredder. Sheets of white paper were being swallowed, shredded scraps falling like snow. I couldn't make out the content, but Brandon's tense and almost panicked expression told me this wasn't a regular report. Financial documents. Fraud I didn't know. But I smelled deceit. I returned to my cleaning cart, my hands trembling as I emptied Brandon's trash. Among the coffee cups and shredded papers, I found a crumpled note with a few numbers and the handwritten word offshore. I slipped it into my uniform pocket, feeling like I'd touched something dangerous. I said nothing, did nothing, just kept cleaning the floor. But in my mind, a plan was starting to form. I remembered what Grandma once told me. Justice doesn't come unless you stand up and demand it. She taught me that in a world where people of color are pushed to the margins, silence is complicity. But I also knew I'd need more than anger to defeat Brandon Evidence. Apex Dynamics wasn't just my workplace, but a symbol of inequality. This company created algorithms that powered ads, self-driving cars, and even surveillance systems, but beneath it all was a structure of discrimination. I saw white engineers getting promotions, while people like Marcus and Tanya were replaced with fresh faces Brandon deemed more fitting. I heard whispers in the break room, where the janitorial team, primarily people of color, shared stories of low pay, being denied leave, and being called names that weren't theirs. If I wanted to change things, I had to strike at the center of power. Brandon Pierce. The city lights still blazed as I left Apex that night, but my heart was heavy. I thought of Amara, of how she once asked Mom, "Why do you work so hard, and why do they still not respect you?" I had no answer. But deep down, I vowed to show her that her mother was more than just a janitor. I thought of Grandma, who once faced batons and fire hoses to demand the right to vote. And I thought of my secret, the shares in Apex. My uncle had left me, the very thing that could bring Brandon and his system to their knees. But I needed time. I needed evidence. I needed the perfect plan. As I stepped out of the tower, Atlanta's cold didn't make me shiver, because inside me, the fire of justice burned hotter than ever. Have you ever stood before a secret powerful enough to change the world, but knew that opening it might cost you everything? Brandon Pierce's laughter echoed through the Apex Dynamics lobby, like a knife cutting deep into my dignity. But that moment lit the flame that would one day burn his empire. That Wednesday afternoon, Atlanta was soaked in drizzle, the dampness seeping through my silver-gray uniform as I mopped the marble floor of Apex Dynamics' main lobby. The 60-story tower, with its gleaming glass walls and crystal chandeliers, stood as a monument to power and wealth. But to me, it was a battlefield. I, Maya Jackson, 42 years old, African American, had spent 10 years cleaning the scuff marks left by men like Brandon Pierce, the white CEO of Apex, who treated me like air. The bleach burned my nostrils, my hands clenched, the mop handle tight, but my mind lingered on the slip of paper I'd found the night before, the one that said offshore. A secret of Brandon's I didn't yet understand, but I knew it was the key to taking him down. The lobby was more crowded than usual. Employees came and went. Phones rang non-stop. I kept my head down, focused on the floor, trying to avoid eye contact with anyone. Then the elevator doors opened with a sharp ding. Brandon stepped out, navy suit, tailored to perfection. Blonde hair, slicked back, that smug smile on his face, like he owned all of Atlanta. He was flanked by 3 other executives, all white, all in pressed shirts, their loud laughter bouncing off the marble. They talked about a massive deal, million-dollar figures rolling off their tongues like they were playing a game. I stepped back, hoping to go unnoticed. But then came a loud smash, cutting through the noise like a blade. A Starbucks cup hit the floor, brown liquid spreading in a pool just a few steps from the elevator. I didn't see who dropped it, but Brandon's eyes locked on mine. The entire lobby went silent, as if the world held its breath, waiting to see what he would do. He didn't speak at first. He walked forward slowly, his polished leather shoes stopping before the puddle. Then, with a sneer, he pointed at me and barked, his voice icy cold. "Clean it up, old lady." Laughter erupted from the group of executives, a cruel chorus. Other employees, black receptionists, white accountants, turned to look. Some bowed their heads. Others whispered. I stood there, my grip on the mop so tight, my knuckles turned white, blood seemingly frozen in my veins. My face burned, not with shame, but with the rage exploding in my chest. Old lady. Those 3 words weren't just an insult. They were a slap to my dignity, a blow to the years I'd worked my fingers raw to raise Amara, to care for my grandmother. They reminded me that in Brandon's eyes, and in the white power structure he ruled, I was nothing more than a tool. I wanted to scream at him, to throw the bucket at his $1,000 suit, to tell everyone in that lobby about the slip of paper, the offshore secret I'd uncovered. But I knew I had no power in Apex's glimmering lobby. I was a black woman, a janitor, the invisible. So I bit my tongue, knelt and scrubbed that puddle clean, every tear held back burning behind my eyes. Brandon's laughter and that of his directors echoed in my mind as I pushed my cart down the hallway and into the break room. The small break room, with its dim fluorescent lights and burnt coffee smell, was where the cleaning crew gathered after their shifts. I sat on a plastic chair, hands trembling, as I opened a water bottle, fighting to hold in my rage. Tanya, once the receptionist before Brandon fired her, had told me, "At Apex, they don't see us, Maya. Especially not us, the black ones." Her words rang in my ears, and the image of Marcus, the security guard, fired for daring to request time off. Apex Dynamics wasn't just a tech company. It was a system designed to keep people like me at the bottom, while Brandon and his white executives ruled from the top. But I had something Brandon didn't know about. 10 years ago, my uncle, a silent investor, left me a significant stake in Apex. It was power I kept hidden like a dagger tucked in my pocket. I stayed here mopping floors, observing, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to see this system collapse. Today's coffee incident wasn't just a humiliation, it was the final straw. The match to the plan I'd long been preparing. In the break room, under that dull light, I whispered to myself, "Brandon Pierce, you will pay." Not with words, but with the truth. I thought of Amara. How she would look at me if she knew someone had called her mother old lady. I thought of Grandma, who once stared down riot police for her right to be equal. And I thought of that offshore note in my pocket, a lead, a clue, a secret tied to Brandon's lies. As I rose and pushed my cart out of the break room, the chandelier in the lobby still glowed bright, but I was no longer invisible. Inside me, a fire for justice had been lit, and it wouldn't go out, not until Brandon and Apex with him were forced to their knees in apology. Have you ever swallowed humiliation, waiting for the day you'd rise, while the whole world begged you to stay down? In the darkness of the Apex Dynamics break room, while Brandon Pierce's mocking laughter still echoed in my mind, I clutched the offshore note. I remembered the secret powerful enough to destroy his throne, a secret I had kept hidden for a decade. The night after the public humiliation in the lobby, I sat alone in the small break room of the janitorial team, the flickering fluorescent light overhead casting shadows across the walls. The burnt smell of coffee and bleach mingled in the air, but my mind was elsewhere. I, Maya Jackson, 42 years old, African American, was not just the cleaning woman pushing a cart through the gleaming halls of Apex Dynamics. I was a mother, a granddaughter, and the keeper of a secret that no white executive in this 60-story tower could have imagined. My hand reached into the pocket of my uniform, brushing against the crumpled slip of paper I had found in Brandon's trash. The word offshore, scrawled hastily like a whisper of his guilt. But that was only the beginning. The real secret was far bigger, and it started 10 years ago. 10 years ago, my uncle Samuel Carter passed away. He was a silent investor, a man who had built his wealth from the ground up on Wall Street, fighting every step of the way to be respected as a black man in a financial world ruled by white power. He never bragged, but when I was a child, he'd often speak of big dreams, not just for himself, but for our whole community. When he died, I received a phone call from his lawyer. In our tiny apartment in Southeast Atlanta, with my grandmother sitting beside me, I was informed that he had left me an unexpected asset, a significant stake in Apex Dynamics, an up-and-coming tech company he had invested in from the beginning. It wasn't just shares, it was power voice, and the ability to change an entire system. I could have sold them. With that money, I could have left Southeast Atlanta, where police sirens howled every night. I could have sent Amara, my daughter, to an elite school instead of scraping together every dollar for tutoring. But I didn't. I chose to stay at Apex wearing the silver-gray uniform, mopping floors, emptying trash bins, and watching. Because I knew Apex was not just a company, it was a machine of injustice, where people like me, like Marcus, like Tanya, were crushed under the boots of men like Brandon Pierce. I stayed because I wanted to see the day Brandon and the white power structure he led fell. My shares were the ace up my sleeve, but I needed proof like the offshore slip now in my hand to use them. Brandon Pierce, CEO of Apex, was the very symbol of that injustice. I saw him fire Marcus, the black security guard, just for requesting a single day off to care for his wife with cancer. Tanya said she was dismissed for refusing to be too friendly with a white executive. And I watched Brandon turn Apex into his playground yacht parties in Savannah. Supercars are parked outside the tower, while the janitorial crew, nearly all people of color, were overworked, underpaid, and invisible. Apex Dynamics, with its AI algorithms that powered everything from ads to self-driving cars, was hailed as the future of America. But I knew the truth. Behind the shine was a system that kept people like me at the bottom. That night in the break room, I thought of my grandmother, who once walked through segregation barricades to vote in the 1960s. She used to say, "Maya, you can't wait for justice. You have to take it." I thought of Amara and how she once asked me, "Mom, why do you work so hard, but they still don't respect you?" Her question cut like a blade, but it also became my drive. I didn't want Amara to grow up in a world where she had to bow before men like Brandon. And I thought of the offshore note, a clue to Brandon's secret. Maybe it was financial fraud, maybe something bigger. I didn't know for sure, but I knew I had to find out. I stood up and pushed my cleaning cart out of the break room, its wheels creaking down the hallway. The crystal chandelier in the lobby still gleamed, but I no longer felt small. Today's humiliation, when Brandon had called me old lady in front of a crowd, had changed everything. It wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war. I knew that to bring Brandon down, I needed more than rage. I needed proof. I needed a plan. And I needed the perfect moment to use my shares. As I stepped out of the tower, the cold of Atlanta wrapped around me. But inside, I felt the heat of a fire that could not be extinguished. I was no longer just Maya Jackson, the janitor. I was the woman who would make Brandon Pierce and Apex Dynamics pay for what they did to me, Marcus, Tanya, and every worker they ever dismissed as worthless. Have you ever held a secret powerful enough to topple an empire, but knew that using it might make the whole world turn against you? Under the dim lights of a bakery on the outskirts of Atlanta, I looked into Kevin Brooks's eyes and said, "It's time to take Brandon Pierce down," knowing that once this plan began, there would be no turning back. A few days after the humiliation in Apex Dynamics' lobby, Brandon Pierce's old lady words still burned like a brand on my heart. But that anger didn't break me. It turned into the fire that pushed me to act. I'm Maya Jackson, 42 years old. African American, was not just the janitor who mopped the floors of Apex's 60-story tower. I was the holder of a large share of the company, a secret I had kept hidden for 10 years. And I was the one who found the offshore note in Brandon's trash, a clue to his dark secrets. I knew I couldn't face him alone, not within the white power structure of Apex, where people like me were invisible. I needed an ally. And that's why I called Kevin Brooks. Kevin was an old friend from high school, a black attorney who, like me, grew up in Southeast Atlanta. He had seen our community's injustices and now ran a small law firm dedicated to helping exploited workers. I asked him to meet at a small bakery far from Apex's surveillance cameras and ears. As I stepped in, the smell of toasted bread and coffee filled the air, but I felt no warmth. My heart pounded as I sat across from Kevin, his gaze sharp, but filled with trust. "Maya," he said in his deep voice, "you called me in the middle of the night. What's going on?" I took a deep breath, pulled the offshore note from my uniform pocket, and laid it on the table. "Brandon Pierce," I said, voice low but firm. "He's firing people, unjustly destroying documents, and now this. I think he's hiding something big, possibly financial fraud." I told him everything: how Brandon fired Marcus and Tanya, how he called me old lady in front of a crowd, and most importantly about my shares in Apex, the ones my Uncle Samuel left me, the ones that made me the largest shareholder in the company. Kevin leaned in, eyes lighting up like a warrior preparing for battle. "Maya," he said, "you can take him down. With those shares, you have power. But we need evidence, solid evidence." I nodded, my heart pounding. I had already taken photos of a few documents from Brandon's trash, using a cheap phone one that didn't connect to the company Wi-Fi to avoid detection. There were mismatched numbers, emails about illegal cost-cutting, and the offshore note. It all pointed to Brandon being more than a bad boss. He could be a criminal. But Apex Dynamics was a massive machine with AI algorithms that ran everything from ads to surveillance. If Brandon found out I was snooping, I wouldn't just lose my job. I could lose everything. Amara, the tiny home where Grandma still lived. Kevin placed a hand on my shoulder. Voice steady. "I'll examine the note and contact a few people I know in finance. But Maya, you must keep gathering evidence, emails, documents, anything you can get from Brandon's office. And we aim for next month's shareholder meeting. That's your moment to go public." I swallowed hard, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a cliff. The shareholder meeting, the gathering of the board, primarily white, to hear Brandon boast about profits, would also be where I could use my shares to vote him out. But the risk was real. Brandon wouldn't fire me if I failed. He'd try to destroy me. I thought of Amara and her dream of becoming a doctor. I thought of Grandma, who once stood against batons for equality. And I thought of Marcus, Tanya, and the cleaning crew, the black workers Brandon treated like trash. Apex wasn't just a company. It was a symbol of a broken system, where workers like me were exploited while men like Brandon lived in luxury yachts and supercars. I looked at Kevin and said, "I'll do it. But I need you with me, Kevin." He smiled, gripping my hand. "I'm always with you, Maya. This isn't just your fight. It's all of ours." As I left the bakery, the Atlanta sky had darkened, the city lights shimmering like stars. But I didn't feel alone. The offshore note in my pocket reminded me that I held the key to bringing Brandon down. In my heart, my grandmother's words echoed, "Justice doesn't come if you don't stand up and demand it." I knew the road ahead was dangerous, but I wasn't afraid. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for those crushed by this system, for the black people rendered invisible. The plan had begun, and Brandon Pierce had no idea that a storm was coming. Have you ever made a secret plan that made your heart pound, knowing one wrong move could destroy everything? Under the dim lights of the Apex Dynamics hallway, I slipped into the shadows of Brandon Pierce's office, my heart pounding, knowing that one wrong move could destroy everything: my world and Amara's dreams. 1 week before the shareholders meeting, I, Maya Jackson, 42 years old, African American, was still pushing my cleaning cart through the gleaming corridors of Apex Dynamics. But now, each step was part of a dangerous plan. After meeting with Kevin Brooks, my ally and a black attorney, I understood that to take Brandon Pierce down, I needed undeniable evidence Not just the offshore slip I had found in his trash, but documents, emails, anything that could prove he was sabotaging the company and the lives of people like me. With its AI algorithms that powered everything from advertising to surveillance, Apex Dynamics was a fortress of white power, and I, a black janitor, was playing a deadly game inside its heart. Each night, as the 60-story tower sank into silence, I went about my duties as usual, wiping desks, emptying bins, but my eyes were always watching. Brandon's office on the 45th floor, with its glass wall overlooking Atlanta, was the ultimate target. He left traces everywhere, papers scattered, coffee cups piled up, as if the world belonged to him. But I knew within that carelessness was my opportunity. I started with the trash. That's where I'd found the offshore note with the word Cayman and a string of numbers hinting at a secret bank account. I photographed it with a cheap phone that never connected to company Wi-Fi to avoid detection. Then I carefully replaced the note as if I'd never touched it. But the trash wasn't enough. Kevin said we needed emails and reports, something that didn't just imply fraud, but proved it. So I snuck into the print room on the 40th floor, where executives' printers stored document copies. Under the faint blue light of the screen, I found it. An email from Brandon to a financial director with the line, "Transfer 2M to Cayman Fund before the audit." My heart thundered as I printed a copy and hid it inside the trash bag of my cleaning cart. Each night, I brought home another puzzle piece, an email, a report, a note, and gave them to Kevin, who analyzed them with his financial contacts. That fateful night, I decided to take a greater risk. I knew Brandon often left his computer on when leaving the office, and an unsent draft email could be the key. After the night guard stepped away from the hallway, I wheeled my cart into his office. His expensive cologne still lingered in the air. The computer glowed faintly, locked, but displaying email notifications. I glanced around, no cameras in the room, but the hallway had one. I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the screen. Then a sound froze me in place. Footsteps in the hallway. I ducked behind the file cabinet, breath caught in my throat, as a security guard passed, flashlight beams sweeping across the glass door. My heart slammed in my chest, like it wanted out, but he didn't come in. When the footsteps faded, I emerged, hands trembling, and pushed the cart out as calmly as possible. Every risk made me think of Amara, my daughter studying in our small apartment in southeast Atlanta. If I got caught, her dream of becoming a doctor would shatter. I thought of Grandma, who once faced down the police for equality, and wondered if she would be proud of me. I thought of Marcus, Tanya, and the cleaning team the black workers Brandon trampled. Apex wasn't just a company. It was a symbol of an unjust system where workers like me were exploited while Brandon lived in luxury yachts and sports cars. I couldn't stop. Not now. Not after coming this far. Kevin called the next morning, his voice urgent. "Maya, that email you sent is gold. It links Brandon to an offshore account and a shell company in the Caymans. But we need more, a signed document or a direct email from him." I nodded over the phone, knowing that meant returning to Brandon's office and taking another risk. I felt Atlanta's cold seep into my skin, but the fire of justice burned hotter inside me than ever. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for those rendered invisible by this system, for the black people called old lady, or the security guy. Each piece of evidence was a bullet, and I was loading my gun for the battle at the shareholders' meeting. As I pushed my cart through the hallway that night, the crystal chandelier still shone bright, but I was no longer a shadow. I was Maya Jackson, hunting the truth in the dark, and Brandon Pierce had no idea I was getting closer every day. Have you ever risked everything to uncover the truth, knowing one careless second could cost you everything? In my small apartment in southeast Atlanta, as the dim yellow light shone over the stack of evidence against Brandon Pierce, Maya Jackson sat motionless, knowing that tomorrow would change everything or destroy everything I loved. The night before the Apex Dynamics shareholders meeting, I didn't sleep. My small apartment, where the occasional wail of police sirens drifted through the window, was my only refuge from Apex's 60-story glass and steel tower. Maya Jackson, 42 years old, African American, wasn't just the janitor who had spent 10 years scrubbing floors beneath Brandon Pierce's shoes. I was the holder of a significant stake in the company, a secret passed down from my Uncle Samuel, and I was the one who had risked everything to gather the evidence against Brandon: the offshore slip, the emails about Cayman accounts, the falsified reports. But now, as the clock struck midnight, the cold of Atlanta wasn't just outside, it was in my bones. On the kitchen table beneath the soft yellow light lay the stack of documents prepared by Kevin Brooks, my ally and attorney. Each sheet was a piece of the truth: an email from Brandon instructing a transfer to an offshore account. A financial report is manipulated to hide losses. A handwritten note signed by him about staff reduction to maximize profit. This evidence wasn't just enough to oust Brandon at the shareholders meeting. It could put him behind bars. But as I looked at it, my hands trembled. If I failed, if the all-white board of Apex sided with Brandon, I could lose everything: my job, my home, even Amara, my daughter, who was sleeping in the next room, dreaming of becoming a doctor. I stood and walked to Amara's door. Through the crack, I saw her lying on the bed, a science book open beside her, moonlight falling gently across her peaceful face. Amara, 15 years old, was why I woke up every morning, the fire that kept me going. I remembered her question: "Mom, why do you work so hard, and why do they still not respect you?" Tomorrow, I wanted Amara to see that her mother wasn't just the old lady in Brandon's eyes. I wanted her to witness a black woman standing tall, not just for herself, but for all those crushed by the system. I returned to the table and looked at my silver-gray uniform draped over the chair, still faintly smelling of bleach. It was the symbol of years I had been treated as invisible. But tomorrow, I would wear it one last time, not to scrub floors, but to walk into that boardroom and face Brandon. I thought of my grandmother Ella, who once walked through segregation lines to cast a vote in the 1960s. She taught me, justice doesn't come if you don't stand up and demand it. Her words stirred inside me like wind fueling a flame. I thought of Uncle Samuel, who left me his shares not for comfort, but so I could change the world. I thought of Marcus, the security guard Brandon fired for the asking to care for his sick wife, and Tanya, the receptionist dismissed for refusing to be too friendly with a white executive. Apex Dynamics, with its AI algorithms said to shape the future, was a machine of injustice, where workers of color like me were exploited, while Brandon lived in luxury with yachts and sports cars. The evidence on the table wasn't just ammunition against Brandon. It was a voice for those the system tried to silence. Tomorrow, I would stand before the bored white men in expensive suits and say, "I'm not just a janitor. I'm an owner of this company." But fear still crept in. I remembered the moment I almost got caught by security in Brandon's office, the flashlight sweeping across the glass. If I were discovered before the meeting, Brandon wouldn't just fire me, he'd use every ounce of his power to destroy me. I looked at the family photo on the wall. Amara, Grandma, and I were all smiling on a summer day. If I failed, that smile could disappear forever. But then I remembered Kevin's words. "Maya, this isn't just your fight, ours." Kevin had vetted the documents, contacted financial insiders, and prepared everything to support me at the meeting. I wasn't alone. I sat down and whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, Brandon Pierce is done." The words felt like a vow echoing through my small apartment. The yellow light still glowed over the stack of evidence, and I felt the strength of Grandma, Uncle Samuel, Amara, Marcus, and Tanya. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every black worker who had been treated as invisible. For every person called old lady or the security guy. As I stood up, the moonlight outside the window gleamed brightly, as if Atlanta itself was watching. Tomorrow, I would walk into Apex Dynamics, not to clean floors, but to demand justice. Have you ever stayed awake before a decision that could change your life, knowing that not acting would be worse than failing? As I pushed my cleaning cart through the doors of the Apex Dynamics boardroom, Brandon Pierce's condescending stare twisted into terror, because today, Maya Jackson wasn't here to mop floors. I was here to tear down his empire. On the morning of the shareholders' meeting, Atlanta gleamed under the sunlight, but a storm was surging within me. Maya Jackson, 42 years old, African American, entered Apex Dynamics' 60-story tower in my usual silver-gray uniform water bucket, clanking beside me as always. But today wasn't like any other day. In my pocket, I carried the stack of evidence against Brandon Pierce: emails about offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, falsified financial reports, handwritten notes bearing his signature. And in my heart, I carried the power of the shares my Uncle Samuel had left me. 10 years as a janitor, called an old lady, and treated as invisible, had brought me to this moment. The boardroom on the 50th floor was a fortress of power, long wooden tables, leather chairs, and glass walls overlooking Atlanta. The board of directors, 12 white men in expensive suits, sat around the table murmuring about profits and stock. At the head stood Brandon Pierce, blonde hair perfectly styled, a smug smile carved like a king's mask. He was boasting about Apex's record-breaking year, touting the AI algorithms that had placed the company at the top of the tech industry. I waited outside the door, hand gripping the handle of my cart, heart pounding. Kevin Brooks, my ally and attorney, texted, "Go in, Maya. Now's the time." I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, the creaking wheels slicing through Brandon's speech. Everyone turned. Brandon fell silent, his eyes locking onto mine, a sneer spreading across his face. "What's she doing here?" he snapped coldly. The board murmured. A few chuckled. I stood in my janitor's uniform, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. But I thought of Amara, Grandma, Marcus, Tanya, those crushed by this system. With a loud thud, I stepped forward and placed the stack of evidence on the board table. "I'm not just a janitor, Brandon," I said, voice like steel. "I'm the largest shareholder of Apex Dynamics, and I own this company." The room froze. Brandon laughed, forced and hollow. "What kind of joke is this, old lady?" he mocked, waving me off like a fly. The board joined in with uneasy chuckles, but their eyes began to flicker, their confidence wavering. I didn't flinch. I opened the folder and read each line aloud. Email from Brandon Pierce, ordering $2 million transferred to an offshore Cayman account. Falsified financial report hiding $10 million in losses. Handwritten note signed by Brandon about firing 200 employees to optimize profits. Each word I spoke landed like a hammer, cracking the smug facade on Brandon's face. The board turned pale, whispers silenced suspicion, replaced by dread. Kevin entered the room holding official documents verifying my ownership. "Ms. Jackson holds 51% of Apex Dynamics," he said firmly. "She has the authority to terminate anyone, including the CEO." Brandon slammed his fist on the table. "You can't do this! This is my company," he shouted. But no one stood with him. I met his eyes, voice calm but sharp. "Brandon, you're fired. Effective immediately. He stood there, face flushed, red hands trembling. Then, like a cornered animal, he stormed out of the room, the door slamming behind him. The boardroom erupted in whispers. One elderly board member, white hair trembling, looked at me and said, voice shaking, You did it." I nodded. My heart still raced, but not from fear, from pride. I thought of Grandma, who once faced batons to claim her right to vote. I thought of Amara, who would see that her mother didn't bow. And I thought of Marcus Tanya and the janitorial staff, those Brandon had called trash. Apex Dynamics was more than a tech company. It symbolized systemic injustice. And today, I had shattered a part of it. As I exited the boardroom, pushing my cart one last time, the crystal chandelier in the lobby still glowed. But I was no longer invisible. I was Maya Jackson, the woman who brought Brandon Pierce to his knees, not with fists, but with the truth. Tomorrow I would return, not in a uniform, but in my new role, leading Apex toward a future of justice. But for now, I just wanted to go home, hold Amara close, and tell her, Mama won. Have you ever witnessed a moment when the world stopped because the truth toppled the powerful? When Brandon Pierce stood before me, his face burning red, fists trembling from being fired. Maya Jackson looked him straight in the eyes and saw not a king, but a man unraveling under the weight of the truth. Just minutes after I revealed my identity and fired Brandon Pierce in the Apex Dynamics boardroom, the 50th floor still trembled with whispers. The board of directors, white men in expensive suits, sat frozen gazes flickering between shock and fear. Maya Jackson, 42 years old. African American, stood there in my silver-gray uniform, still gripping the stack of evidence emails about the offshore Cayman account, falsified financial reports, a handwritten note with Brandon's signature, feeling like the whole world was watching me. But the battle wasn't over. Brandon hadn't gone far after storming out of the boardroom with the door slam. He came back, and I knew he wouldn't go down quietly. I stepped into the hallway, the crystal chandelier light gleaming off the granite floor I'd cleaned 1,000 times. Kevin Brooks, my attorney and ally, walked beside me, holding the official papers that confirmed my ownership. "You did it, Maya," he whispered. But before I could respond, a snarling voice cut through the air. "You." Brandon stood at the end of the hallway, eyes bloodshot, his navy suit now crumpled. He charged forward, pointing at me like he meant to pierce flesh. "You think you can take my company, a damn janitor?" He spat out the word janitor like it was venom, and in that moment, I saw his true self. Not just a corrupt CEO, but the embodiment of the white power system that had treated me, Marcus Tanya, and so many other people of color, like trash. I stood my ground. "I didn't take your company." "Brandon," I said, voice calm but ice sharp, "I took back justice for me, Marcus Tanya, and everyone you trampled." He scoffed, but his laugh trembled. "You think the board will side with you?" He hesitated, unable to say it, but I knew what he meant. A black person, a woman, a janitor. I stepped closer and looked him dead in the eyes. They already did. They saw the evidence, the Cayman account, the fake reports, your signature. "You're done, Brandon." He roared, slamming his fist against the wall, echoing through the hallway. "This isn't over. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you." But his voice faltered like a wounded animal. Kevin stepped forward, tone solid as stone. "Try it. Pierce, Ms. Jackson's shares are legally binding. The evidence is indisputable. Any court will tear your case apart." Brandon turned to Kevin, face contorted with rage. "You too, Brooks. You too, Black." He stopped himself, but the hatred in his eyes spoke volumes. I didn't flinch. "Go, Brandon," I said. before security has to remove you. He stood trembling, turned and walked away, his figure shrinking down the gleaming corridor. I exhaled, feeling like I'd just stepped through fire. Kevin placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're stronger than I ever imagined, Maya." I smiled faintly, though inside, I could still hear Brandon's mocking laughter, the sting of old lady echoing. Today, I had silenced him, but I knew he wouldn't give up easily. With AI systems powering everything from advertising to surveillance, Apex Dynamics was a playground for men like Brandon. And this system doesn't crumble in a single day. But I had cracked it. I had brought down a white CEO who believed himself untouchable. I thought of Amara, my daughter waiting at home, unaware that her mother had just changed her destiny. I thought of Grandma, who once faced down the police for civil rights, and wondered if she was smiling from above. I thought of Marcus Tanya, and the janitorial crew, the black workers Brandon had called expendable. Today's victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us who the system had silenced. As I pushed my cleaning cart into the lobby for the last time, a young black woman at the front desk looked at me and whispered, "You did it, Ms. Maya." I nodded, heart warm. For the first time in 10 years, I felt seen. As I stepped outside the tower, Atlanta's sun blazed against my skin. I knew the news would spread fast. Black janitor topples Apex Dynamics CEO. I knew Brandon would fight back, maybe with a lawsuit or lies on TV. But I wasn't afraid. I had Kevin. I had the evidence. And more importantly, I had the truth. Tomorrow, I would return to Apex, not to mop floors, but to lead the company forward with fairness, transparency, and respect for every person, no matter their color. I had defeated Brandon Pierce, not with fists, but with the strength of a black woman once deemed invisible. Have you ever watched a bully collapse before the truth and felt justice surge through your heart? When Brandon Pierce stood in front of me, face burning, red fists trembling from being fired, I, Maya Jackson, looked him straight in the eyes and saw not a king, but a fallen man, crumbling beneath the weight of the truth. Just minutes after I had revealed my identity and fired Brandon Pierce at the Apex Dynamics shareholders meeting, the boardroom on the 50th floor still trembled with whispers. The board of directors, white men in expensive suits, sat in stunned silence, their eyes shifting between shock and fear. Maya Jackson, 42 years old, African American, stood there in my silver-gray uniform, still gripping the stack of evidence emails about the offshore Cayman account, falsified financial reports, handwritten notes with Brandon's signature, feeling as if the entire world was watching me. But the battle wasn't over. After storming out of the boardroom with a slammed door, Brandon hadn't gone far. He came back, and I knew he wouldn't let himself lose easily. I stepped into the hallway, the crystal chandelier reflecting off the granite floors I had cleaned thousands of times. Kevin Brooks, my attorney and ally, walked beside me, holding the documents confirming my ownership. "You did it, Maya," he whispered. But before I could respond, a low growl cut through the air. "You." Brandon stood at the end of the hallway, eyes bloodshot, his once pressed navy suit now wrinkled. He marched forward, pointing a shaking finger at me like a spear. "You think you can take my company, a damn janitor?" He spat out the word janitor like a curse. And at that moment, I saw his true self, not just a corrupt CEO, but the embodiment of a white power structure that had treated me, Marcus Tanya, and countless others like garbage. I stood my ground. "I didn't take your company, Brandon," I said, calm but razor sharp. "I took back justice for myself, Marcus Tanya, and everyone you trampled." He scoffed, but his laugh was trembling. "You think the board will listen to you? He He paused, unable to say the words, but I knew what he meant. A person of color. A woman. A janitor. I stepped forward and locked eyes with him. They already did. They saw the evidence. The Cayman account. The fake reports. Your signature. You're finished, Brandon. He roared, slamming his fist into the wall, echoing down the hallway. This isn't over. I'll sue you. I'll destroy you. But his voice cracked like a wounded beast. Kevin stepped forward, his tone steady and commanding. Try it, Pierce. Ms. Jackson's ownership is legal and the evidence is irrefutable. The courts will tear your case apart. Brandon turned to Kevin, his face twisted in fury. You too, Brooks. You too. Black. He stopped himself, but the hatred in his eyes said it all. I didn't flinch. Leave, Brandon, I said, before security has to remove you. He stood there, fists shaking, then turned and walked away, his figure shrinking beneath the chandelier's gleam. I exhaled deeply, as if I had just walked through fire. Kevin placed a hand on my shoulder. You're stronger than I thought, Maya. I gave a faint smile, but inside I still heard Brandon's mocking laughter from the coffee spill and heard old lady echoing. Today, I had silenced him, but I knew he wouldn't stop. With its AI systems controlling everything from advertising to surveillance, Apex Dynamics was a playground for men like Brandon, and the system doesn't fall in a day. But I had shattered part of it, a white CEO who thought he was untouchable. I thought of Amara, my daughter waiting at home, not knowing her mother had just changed her destiny. I thought of Grandma, who once stood up to the police for civil rights, and wondered if she was smiling from above. I thought of Marcus Tanya and the janitorial crew black workers, whom Brandon had called expendable. Today's victory wasn't just mine. It was ours for all of us, silenced by the system. As I pushed my cleaning cart into the lobby one last time, a young black woman at the reception desk looked at me and whispered, "You did it, Ms. Maya." I nodded, heart full. For the first time in 10 years, I felt seen. As I stepped outside the tower, Atlanta's sunlight lit up my skin. I knew the headlines would spread fast. Black janitor overthrows Apex Dynamics CEO. I knew Brandon would retaliate, maybe with a lawsuit or slander on television. But I wasn't afraid. I had Kevin. I had evidence. And most importantly, I had the truth. Tomorrow, I would return to Apex, not to clean floors, but to lead the company with justice, transparency, and respect for every person, no matter their color. I had taken down Brandon Pierce not with fists, but with the power of a black woman the world once refused to see. Have you ever watched a bully fall before the truth and felt the power of justice surge through your heart? As the Atlanta sunlight streamed through the glass walls of Apex Dynamics, Maya Jackson stood amid thunderous applause, not invisible anymore, but a flame igniting hope in millions of exploited workers, especially people of color like me. On the afternoon of May 23, 2025, just hours after I fired Brandon Pierce at the shareholders meeting, the 60-story tower of Apex Dynamics felt like it was shaking beneath a wave of transformation. Maya Jackson, 42 years old, African American, once called Old Lady while mopping floors, now stood in the main lobby, not in a silver-gray uniform, but in a simple jacket, holding the stack of evidence that had brought Brandon down. Emails about the offshore Cayman account, falsified financial reports, notes signed by him. The confrontation in the hallway where Brandon shouted threats of lawsuits still echoed, but now I could feel the truth rippling through every corner of Apex. News spread like wildfire. By noon, headlines exploded online. Black janitor overthrows Apex Dynamics CEO in shocking shareholders meeting. CNN, MSNBC, and social media platforms were flooded with my story. The hashtag #MayaJackson trended on Twitter with thousands calling me the Justice Queen and the System Breaker. But I wasn't chasing fame. I fought for Marcus Tanya and the janitorial crew, people of color Brandon called expendable. I fought for my daughter Amara, so she could grow up in a world where she'd never have to bow her head. And I fought for my grandmother, who once faced batons to demand equal rights. I returned to Apex that afternoon, not to mop floors, but to begin changing. In the boardroom, still rattled from Brandon's fall, the directors voted to appoint me as interim chairwoman. I stood before them, my voice firm. Apex Dynamics will no longer be a machine of exploitation. From today, no more firing for profit. No more racial discrimination. And the janitorial staff will receive an immediate raise. An elderly board member nodded, his eyes full of respect. I thought of Marcus, who was fired for requesting time off to care for his wife. I thought of Tanya, dismissed for refusing to be too friendly with a white executive. They'll be invited back, I said, and we'll restore dignity to every worker. When I entered the janitor's break room, still lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs, the team, primarily people of color, rose in a standing ovation. Lena, a longtime colleague, hugged me tight, eyes filled with tears. Maya, you gave us our dignity back. Jamal, a young custodian, gripped my hand. You're a legend. Ms. Maya. I smiled, but I felt the weight of responsibility in my heart. With its AI algorithms powering everything from advertising to surveillance, Apex was not just a company. It was a symbol of injustice, and I was determined to reshape it into a place of respect for everyone, regardless of race or rank. That night, CNN invited me for a live interview. Under the studio lights, I told my story. 10 years as a janitor, called Old Lady. My uncle shared the secret, and the journey to collect evidence against Brandon. The host asked, "What made you keep going when the world tried to silence you?" I paused, thinking of Amara, watching at home, of Grandma up in heaven. I fought for people like me, I said. For people of color. For workers who are treated as invisible. If I can stand up, they can too. After the interview, my phone overflowed with messages from factory workers in Detroit to teachers in Chicago, thanking me for giving them the courage to speak up. When I got home, Amara ran into my arms, eyes glowing. "Mom, I saw you on TV. You're a superhero." I laughed and hugged her tight, all my exhaustion melting away. If Grandma were still here, she'd hold my hand and say, "You did it, Maya." But I knew this victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to Kevin Brooks, who stood by me with legal papers. It belonged to Marcus Tanya and the janitorial crew, people who deserve respect. And it belonged to millions of black workers long crushed under the weight of a white-dominated power system. I stood by the window gazing at Atlanta's shimmering lights. Brandon Pierce was likely already plotting revenge, a lawsuit, a slanderous interview. But I wasn't afraid. I had evidence. I had Kevin. And more importantly, I had the truth. Apex Dynamics was changing, and I would lead it with justice, transparency, and humanity. I was no longer just Maya Jackson, the janitor. I was the woman who shattered a piece of systemic injustice. And I would keep fighting for Amara, our community, and justice. Have you ever felt a moment of triumph that wasn't just yours, but a victory for an entire community rising to demand justice? When Brandon Pierce appeared on the TV screen screaming that Maya Jackson had stolen his company, I stood in my small Atlanta apartment, gripping my phone tightly, knowing that this white man of power was digging his own grave in the face of the truth. May 23rd, 2025. Just days after I fired Brandon Pierce at the Apex Dynamics shareholders meeting, Atlanta was still buzzing with my story. I, Maya Jackson, 42 years old, African American, once the janitor they called Old Lady, was now the interim chairwoman of Apex, a leading tech company whose AI shaped everything from advertising to surveillance. The hashtag #MayaJackson was still trending on Twitter, and headlines across the internet called me the system breaker. But Brandon, the ousted white CEO, wasn't accepting defeat. He had vowed in the hallway of Apex to destroy me, and now he was trying to make good on that threat. But I was ready. It started Friday evening. I sat in my small Southeast Atlanta apartment, the warm yellow light casting a glow over a family photo, me, Amara, and Grandma. Amara, my 15-year-old daughter, was doing homework dreaming of becoming a doctor. I had just reread a message from Marcus, the security guard Brandon once fired. He thanked me for inviting him back to Apex with a raise. Then my phone buzzed. Kevin Brooks, my attorney and ally, was calling urgently. Maya, turn on Fox News. Brandon's losing it on live TV. I switched the channel, and there he was. Brandon Pierce, disheveled blonde hair, wrinkled navy suit, seated in a studio screaming at the host. Maya Jackson is a fraud. He yelled, his eyes bloodshot. She's a janitor who manipulated shares to steal my company. I'm going to sue her until she's penniless. Amara looked at me, eyes wide. Mom, he's lying, right? I nodded and smiled to calm her, but inside I felt a chill creep in. Brandon wasn't just slandering me, he was inciting fear, leaning on prejudice, fueling hatred against a black woman like me. But I wasn't surprised. I had prepared for this thanks to Kevin and the stack of hard evidence, the Cayman account email, falsified financial reports, and Brandon's handwritten notes. Those weren't just what brought him down in the boardroom. They were my shield. The next morning, one of Brandon's lawyers arrived at Apex with a lawsuit accusing me of stock manipulation and defrauding the board. I met him in the lobby, the same granite floor I had once mopped. Ms. Jackson, he said smoothly, retract the termination of Mr. Pierce, or we'll see you in court. Kevin stood beside me, smiling coolly. Check this, I said, handing over a notarized copy of Uncle Samuel's will, legally affirming my ownership. And this, Kevin added, laying down the stack of evidence, Pierce's emails. Cayman accounts. His signature. Want the court to see this. The lawyer skimmed the documents. His face paled. He mumbled an apology and walked away. Hours later, the headlines broke: court dismisses Brandon Pierce's lawsuit as baseless orders him to pay legal fees. But Brandon didn't stop. He showed up on another talk show, voice hoarse from rage, calling me a black thief, an Apex, a victim of woke politics. Then came his final self-destruction. A leaked video surfaced on Twitter, showing Brandon trashing his office at Apex after being fired, throwing chairs, screaming like a child. The internet exploded. Memes flooded every platform. They called him the Meltdown King. The hashtag #BrandonMeltdown overtook Maya Jackson. Former allies, white executives who once laughed with him, publicly disavowed him. I stood in my new office at Apex, gazing through the glass down at Atlanta. I thought of Grandma, who once faced police to demand equal rights, wondering if she was smiling watching Brandon destroy himself. I thought of Amara, who now looked at me like a superhero. And I thought of Marcus, Tanya, and the janitorial team people of color Brandon once trampled. Apex wasn't just a company, but a symbol of systemic injustice. And while I'd broken a piece of it, I knew Brandon wouldn't be the last. But I wasn't afraid. I had Kevin. I had evidence. And above all, I had the truth. That afternoon, Lena, a janitor, knocked on my office door holding a cup of coffee. Ms. Maya, she said, eyes shining, you made us proud. You showed us black folks can win. I took her hand, feeling like the entire community stood behind me. Brandon could scream on TV, but he'd already lost. Not just to me, but to every person the system once made invisible. I looked out over Atlanta, sunlight pouring in, and I knew my journey wasn't over. I would keep leading Apex not just for myself, but but for every black worker who deserves to be seen. Have you ever watched a bully dig his grave and felt justice rise for one person and an entire community? 1 year after Maya Jackson brought down Brandon Pierce and rose from the shadows of Apex Dynamics, I looked out over Atlanta from his former office, no longer invisible, but a guiding flame for a fairer future for workers who had long been overlooked. On May 23, 2025, when I fired Brandon Pierce, the white former CEO of Apex Dynamics, in front of the board, I had no idea that my journey would change a company and millions of hearts across America. Maya Jackson, 42 years old, African American, once a janitor, mocked as the old lady was now the chairwoman of Apex, a leading tech company whose AI algorithms once shaped everything from advertising to surveillance. 1 year later, in May 2026, Apex was no longer the unjust machine Brandon had once controlled. It stood as a testament to truth and justice, especially for people of color like me, Marcus, Tanya, and the janitorial team. I began with small but meaningful changes. In my first week as chairwoman, I signed off on a 20% raise for the janitorial staff, paid time off, and high-quality gloves, so no one would work bare-handed again. Marcus, the security guard once fired by Brandon, returned as head of security, his smile beaming as he shook my hand. Ms. Maya, you gave me back my dignity. Tanya, the former receptionist, became head of HR, ensuring no one would ever be judged by their race or background again. I placed a suggestion box in the break room, and the very first note made me laugh. We need a new coffee machine. The next day, I ordered 3 state-of-the-art coffee makers, and the janitors cheered like kids on Christmas morning. But the change didn't stop there. I ordered a full review of Apex's AI systems to eliminate racial bias in ads and surveillance that had once unfairly targeted people of color. I established the Samuel Carter Scholarship Fund, named after the uncle who left me his shares to support the children of laborers attending college. Amara, my 15-year-old daughter, was the one who suggested the name. When I asked her why, she said, "Because Uncle Samuel gave you strength, and now you're passing it on." I hugged Amara as tears fell quietly. To her, I wasn't just a superhero, I was a pathmaker for her generation. The community beyond Apex began to change too. After my CNN interview, I received thousands of letters from factory workers, teachers, and janitors across America, saying my story gave them the courage to speak up at work. One letter from Rosa, a janitor in Detroit, brought tears to my eyes. Ms. Maya, you gave me the courage to ask for a raise. Now I can buy books for my son. I printed that letter and hung it in my office, a daily reminder that my journey wasn't just about Apex, but about every black worker dismissed by a white-dominated system. Brandon Pierce had become a ghost of himself. He lost every ally after losing the lawsuit and the leaked video of him trashing his office. News reports said he was now selling used cars in a small Georgia town, his reputation in ruins. The hashtag Brandon Meltdown was still circulating on Twitter, a lasting warning that no bully, no matter how powerful, is immune to the truth. But I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt sorrow that he had learned nothing from his fall, unlike what I had learned from 10 years of mopping floors under the chandelier lights. I stood in Brandon's old office looking down at glittering Atlanta. Apex was now a place where workers smiled in the halls, where janitors were called by their names, and where Amara could visit and say, "Mom, I want to be like you. Change the world." I thought of Grandma, who once faced down the police to demand civil rights, and felt her smile from above. I thought of Uncle Samuel, who gave me those shares to survive and fight. And I thought of Marcus, Tanya, and Lena, the people of color who stood beside me. My journey isn't over. Apex was the first step, but injustice still exists. I will keep fighting, not just for myself, but for every worker rendered invisible, for every person of color still being called the old lady or the security guy. Anyone can rise if I, a janitor, could bring down a CEO and change a company. Let my story be the spark that ignites yours. Who do you think karma will visit next? Hit the like button, share this story, and drop a comment. When was the last time you stood up for justice?